For my nonlinear narrative, I continued experimenting with my story about a stressful date. This image shows how I rearranged the original 3-act structure into a zigzag formation. Namwook et al. Highlight that nonlinear narratives often disrupt the relationship between events in order to create suspense. In my story, the climax happened when the character Sam started visibly sweating on the date. Using the zigzag technique, I created suspense as to what triggered his sweating. On top of this, I interweaved a parallel narrative about the character Amy, who was Sam's date. Aronson would call this a hybrid fractured tandem narrative, as the story now includes both flashbacks and multiple narratives, where we see how the two characters approach the same date situation from their unique perspectives. This also fits with the solipsis technique that may use multiple plot lines to center around a theme. I noticed that Amy's scenes helped show a contrast between the two characters' personalities and behaviors. However, it meant there was now less emphasis on Sam's internal world. I thought that this short story could possibly be produced for social media, so having a non-linear timeline with a climactic scene first could help entice viewers that have short attention spans. I learned that it's important to consciously decide how the components of a story are arranged, which ultimately affect how the narrative is experienced and engaged with. In the future, I will explore nonlinear narrative with video art pieces that have more abstract timelines than this experiment. For my podcasting experiment, I came up with a podcast show idea called How Meditation Changed My Life. I then interviewed my friend Shun about his experience with meditation. Berry highlights that listeners actively seek podcast content related to their interests, so I pitched my podcast to listeners that would be keen to learn about meditation. The original dialogue had many awkward pauses and moments where I cut in too soon, so I decided it was best to completely take out my dialogue besides the introduction. This changed my podcast from the interview genre to the storytelling genre, which had more of a European poetic style rather than an American classical style. Meditation is an internal process that is difficult to represent visually. Therefore, choosing the podcast medium for this topic fitted well and encouraged the audience to engage their imagination about Shun's meditation experience. I added background meditative and cultural sounds to help immerse the listener into the story. Linnaeus notes that most podcasts interweave sonic elements using modes of oral production that directly call to a listener's cinematic imagination. Throughout this process, I found that capturing a successful and free-flowing interview is very difficult. However, it is possible to transform the source content into a usable storytelling piece by using podcast editing techniques. In future episodes of How Meditation Changed My Life, I would do more background research, make sure the interviewee is completely relaxed, and get more source content to work with. This will help the voice of the interviewee feel more intimate to the audience. For my interactive narrative experiment, I created a project called The COVID Ripple, which was about people's decision making when they had COVID-19 symptoms. It was a branching narrative with multiple endings that had varying levels of outbreak severity depending on the choices made. The project can be seen as a hypertext documentary as it focuses on the topic of COVID-19, with the audience being able to navigate an outbreak that spreads across people and locations. Using interactive narrative means that important COVID-19 public health information is shared in an engaging and personable way. Aston and Gordenzi would say that the audience is now an active participant in the COVID-infected story world. Audience feedback was that they enjoyed the ethical and moral dilemmas that were posed and feeling like their decisions mattered. In regard to McCurlin's term of navigational control, I found it frustrating that I couldn't control how many different endings the audience would find. And I was curious that some people consciously chose to go the route that would clearly make the COVID outbreak worse because they liked playing the villain. I learnt that it is important to give meaningful choices rather than tokenistic ones, and that projects need to be concise to allow time for more possible playthroughs. In the future, I could alternatively experiment with a fictional interactive story that focuses on just one character and uses a different timeline form, such as Elastic, which has multiple choices but one ultimate ending.